Hey, and welcome to the Inclusive Networker podcast, where we make network marketers, small business owners, and solopreneurs aware of blind spots that could be keeping their networks and businesses small. We give them tips and simple, practical tools to make their businesses more inclusive, and we teach our listeners how to build inclusive communities that support diverse customers, team members, and business partners. So, if you want to authentically build relationships with diverse communities of customers or business partners, you are in the right place. But be warned, you will be challenged, but here's the thing, you won't be judged. I'm your host, Dr. Ramona. I'm a speaker, coach, consultant, public health professor, wife, mom, and a fierce challenger of broken systems that keep people from reaching their highest potential. I'm so excited to be with you on your journey to becoming an inclusive networker. Let's jump right in. Hey, and welcome to this week's episode of the Inclusive Networker podcast. This is your host, Dr. Ramona. And who are we calling into conversation today? Well, it is TaChelle Lawson. I am so very excited to have TaChelle Lawson as my guest. I have known TaChelle for so many years. She is someone who is near and dear to my heart. But let me tell you why she is on the Inclusive Networker podcast. So, with over 20 years of experience in the hospitality industry with an emphasis on food and beverage and luxury retail, TaChelle brings a fresh, no-nonsense approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. She is a dynamic public speaker, award-winning entrepreneur, and enlightened business leader, laser-focused on aligning DEI with business and brand goals to help build client revenues and strengthen brand equity. TaChelle's client brands include Louis Vuitton, Lexus, Heineken, Porsche, Red Bull, Coca-Cola, Mercedes-Benz, Death & Co., Harley-Davidson, Tyson Foods, Heineken, Lamborghini, and Lancome, just to name a few. As founder and president of FIG Strategy and Consulting, TaChelle counsels senior leaders, human resources professionals, and communications influencers on DEI and business alignment to address challenges with employees, customers, and the community. That is near and dear to my heart, TaChelle, the community, I tell you. So her services, they include brand strategy, business management consulting, culture transformation, leadership training, DEI training, and strategic sourcing. As a strategic planner and organized problem solver, Lawson TaChelle, to me, has lent her extensive expertise in business analysis, strategy, and communications management. TaChelle is an active mentor to young women entering the workforce and a small business advocate speaking on issues that challenge small and local businesses. So TaChelle, welcome. I could not be more excited to have you on the Inclusive Networker.
I don't think I have ever had a more welcoming introduction. Holy smokes. Thank you so much, Doc. That was great.
Awesome. So, TaChelle, let's just jump right in. And the first question that I ask my guests is, what is your lens? We have got to know where you're coming from. What's your background? What is your lens? How do you see the world?
Yeah, so it's pretty simple, right? Like everything that you just said. I am a Black woman that has worked with some of the largest international brands, right? Louis Vuitton, Lancome, Mercedes, Bentley, Porsche. And in every environment, and I do mean every environment I've been in my career, I was always the only Black person. And in many cases, I was always the only woman. And so when you're in an environment where you're dealing with some of the most powerful companies, some of the most respected and trusted brands, but simply being a woman and having the audacity to be a Black woman, a lot of who you are just gets called into question, right? Or second guessed. As a Black woman, we know, right? Like we're trained from, the womb up that we have to be twice as good, no room for errors, like the perfection, the pressure. And so when it comes to this place that we're in now, where you have more organizations, you have more companies that are starting to second guess how they've been doing business, right? And how they have been kind of putting TaChelle and Ramona under a microscope for no real reason, right? We have the credibility. It's the, oh, maybe that hasn't necessarily been very fair. And so my lens is that I've lived and operated primarily in a space that it was who you know, right? It's like that in a lot of industries, but it's who you know. And it was also one that truly just valued hard work. And so I was able to move up rather quickly because I chose an industry that valued just putting in the work, right? Like you didn't need a degree. You didn't need to have come from a family of money, etc. You just needed to be willing to put in 60, 70, 80 hours a week, and you would move up. And I was willing to do that, and I was really good, but I was still a Black woman, right? Even with all of that, I was still a Black woman. And so as a result of that, I'd reached a level that by all other purposes, I should have been able to exceed. But I was in a position where this is as far as you can go, TaChelle, right? And I mean, you know me well enough to know, like, I don't really accept that, right? Like the only person that's going to determine where I'm going is me. But in terms of having these conversations now, it's the lens is different. So I'm now able to talk about some of those experiences that I've had and how those decisions now affect business. So if you are known for not giving Black women a fair chance within your company, guess what? Now Black women don't buy from you. Like it's changed. So that's my lens.
Yeah. And so, you know, I really feel that because one of the big issues that I've seen and one of the reasons that I started this work is because I didn't see a lot of Black women at the top of network marketing companies. Yes, there are a few that have, you know, moved up and who have gone through in some companies, not all. But what is it? What do you think it is that causes that cap for Black women in these companies? Or what was it for you? You might not, you know, be able to answer this for all companies, but what was causing that ceiling and that cap for you, or have you seen for other Black women?
Well, for other Black women, I mean, I think there were just not enough honest conversations, right? That were taking place. Like, if I'm the only person that looks like me, who am I able to go and talk to about my experiences? Who's there that can actually relate to what this is like? I'm alone, right? And so those conversations become really limited. And then in the slight chance that you do have the option of being able to talk to a Ramona, right? That might be at another location within the company or something along those lines. Then it becomes cliquey or catty or you're being negative, or my favorite, ungrateful. It was for me, it was really more about the lack of opportunities to have these conversations. I remember several times going to a boss or a boss's boss. I mean, the reason I left my last corporate position was because I was blatantly discriminated against, blatantly, and no one disputed it. I went to human resources. I went to the vice president of my boss and so on and so forth. And no one disputed it, but no one had my back. No one was willing to do anything about it. And so for me, it was, okay, we're going to acknowledge that this is happening, right? Like we're going to make sure that everyone agrees and understands it has nothing to do with job performance. And the best you have, I understand my industry. I have a very specific skill set. But because I have the audacity to show up confidently and do my job, because I have the audacity to show up confidently and not have pom-poms and dance around that I'm really just here to solve a problem, you think it's okay to mistreat me, right? Or ignore some of my challenges. So why it's so normal, I couldn't honestly say, because what would make this an acceptable answer? Like nothing would make this an acceptable answer, right? It was... For me, I've been labeled angry and difficult my entire career. And when I go back, right, I have never been written up. Not one time in my career. Never been documented. Never had anything. But because I had the audacity to be confident and not allow you to treat me like you were doing me a favor by employing me because I'm good at what I do. I was difficult or angry because I responded without emotion to a solution to a problem, or because I didn't smile. Bill doesn't smile. Bill barely even says hello. So how is it that there is that? So back to the lens, I feel so strongly about the danger of labeling. This is something I'm incredibly passionate about, is that Black women are at risk constantly of being labeled or being misunderstood. And that's a huge miss, because you miss out on not only talent, right? Mm-hmm. Again, the bigger issue now is that now companies are starting to see the alignment and how this is affecting the only thing that really matters, right? Which is bottom line, dollars.
Yeah.
So sorry,
yeah.
I know I rambled on a little bit, but the core of it is I don't think I could ever, or you could ever, anyone could ever give us an acceptable answer as to why this happens.
Mm-hmm. And I pulled some really good nuggets out of that. And so one of the
out of that rant.
Yeah, it wasn't a rant. I love it because I could get a few things. So let's talk about them. So the first thing was not being able to have the conversation. And I have noticed that in so many different organizations is that people are like, you just need to work harder. You need to do what everybody else does. Work a few more hours. It's going to pay off time. And it's like everybody wants to ignore the real issue, which is the systems that we have in place in some of these organizations that are holding people back. And so it's not always, as you said, the skill set that I have, or that I haven't been doing what other people are doing. How do we look in our business systems to make sure that they're inclusive, to make sure that they support everybody in the organization? Do we have the right culture on our teams to support all of the people that are on the team, right? All of those things go into this, and it starts with having the conversation that people are not willing to have, and that's why we're here. That's why we have this podcast, right?
No, for sure.
So, yeah, that's the first thing, is the conversation. And then the second thing that you said was that when you do try to have the conversation, you're looked at as ungrateful, or that you don't like the industry, or that there's some type of issue. And it's like, no, I'm not ungrateful. I love the industry. I love the business, but we've got to look a little bit deeper than, oh, these people are just not at the top. They just didn't work hard enough. There's something more. There's something more. We got to disrupt the system.
And and that honest conversation, right? So my response to that has been twofold. In most environments, in most professional environments, think about this. We have been conditioned not to talk about these things, right? Which makes it incredibly uncomfortable now when you start having these conversations. But I think the bigger challenge is, why is it that we're okay with this being the norm, right? Like being labeled difficult, or having the inability to have a difficult conversation, to me is complete BS. And here's why. Because if we look at it again from a pure business perspective, any CEO, any CMO, any leader of any company is willing to have an uncomfortable conversation if their numbers are down. 100%, right? Let's get down to the basics. If I can look at my sales revenue and see that it is down 2%, 7%, 9%, and I'm noticing a pattern, we're having a conversation.
Yeah, quick.
Period, right?
Absolutely.
That conversation has taken place. We are going to find out why my numbers are down. And so the fact that we are so uncomfortable having these people conversations, like the uncomfortable people conversations, proves that it's nonsense. Because I'm willing to have a conversation about money. I'm willing to have a conversation about how this is affecting revenue. And no matter what you tell me, I want to know the truth, because I want to know how we fix this. And so whenever I'm met with that response, right? My response is always, let's say your sales numbers are down. Do you want to pretend like you didn't notice and like we don't have to talk about it, or do you want to get to the bottom of it before this becomes a problem? And what do you think the answer is?
Wow. Wow.
Right? And so
Wow.
that's probably my biggest gift, is being able to turn this stuff back around. Like, no, we're not doing this.
Yeah.
We're not going to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and I use the analogy of, if we were to, and this is kind of a crude analogy, but if you were to look outside and you saw somebody get hit by a car, right, then you would absolutely run to them right then. You
Yeah.
would not say, "Oh, I'm not going to say anything or I'm not going to do anything because I need to protect the driver. I'm just going to keep walking because maybe the driver is going to get their feelings hurt," right?
Right.
You wouldn't do that. And so but that's what we do every day
Yeah.
when we see people have the either microaggressions, subtle acts of exclusion, whatever you call them, that are happening to people, and it literally feels like being hit by a car every day,
Yeah.
and other people watching and not saying anything and not doing anything about it, and it is just absolutely a huge weight that
Yeah.
people of color, BIPOC, people of color, that have to feel all the time. And so I love that, changing it and turning it around and thinking about, in any other situation you would act, but why
You
are we
would.
not acting, right? Why are we not acting? Okay.
I think the answer is simple. Because it doesn't affect the person in the same way. Right? So I can very easily ignore a vegan in a steakhouse because that's not my problem. I love steak. You know what I mean? Like, the fact that they walked in here, I feel like that's how coldly we treat these
Yes.
situations. Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't affect me, so why do I need to say anything? Now, obviously, the vegan in a steakhouse is a different situation. Like, don't walk into a
Yeah.
steakhouse if you can only eat non-meat. But
Right.
but that's essentially the point. Is like, until something actually affects us, we're less likely to step up for it, right? And which is again why I will always bring it back to the business, because that does affect us. And no matter who you are, if you are a capable and serious business leader, you are willing to do what it takes to protect your business.
Absolutely. And it just baffles me as to why we don't think these human things, right, don't affect our business. The demographics of the world are changing.
Ooh,
And
fast.
come on. And when you talk about networking and networking in different communities, we know that people normally network with people that look like them. And they also want to network with companies that are diverse. And if that company is not diverse, then they keep it moving. If that they don't see any kind of diversity, they don't see any kind of inclusion within that company, then they can go to somebody else. And I think that a lot of times maybe network marketers don't understand that even though a lot of brick and mortar companies are being held to this standard, online companies are coming fast behind. And if you're not on board, you will not be, you won't get the business. And especially when you have thousands and hundreds of thousands of people selling the same thing, you got to be inclusive, right?
Yeah, there's literally no such thing as a protected industry, right?
No.
Like, if you think it's one of my favorite responses when I'm like, who are your competitors? We don't have competitors. You don't belong in business, right? Because you're just stupid. I'm sorry, not sorry.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
stupid. There's no industry that is completely protected. There's no industry that is absolved, right, of this accountability. And we're talking legacy companies. You've got Delta's been in hot water. Tesla's been in hot water. Coca-Cola has been in hot water. Starbucks has been in hot water. The idea that you think that only affects these brick and mortars, you're naive. You're absolutely naive. It's actually more so. I personally and professionally think that if you are an online business, you're probably at even greater risk, because I am completely relying on online reviews. I'm doing my homework, and you have to understand now that your consumers are more educated than they used to be,
Way more.
right? Like, they do more research now before they make a purchase. And so if you post, like, one of my favorite case studies to use is a makeup company on Instagram posted sharing this beautiful black woman. Her skin was like yours. And they're advertising products. Oh, I want to support. This looks like a cool business, but I'm doing my homework. I go, first of all, they don't sell products for black women. So that's number one.
Yeah.
That's number one. They got called out, blasted, sales down, so on and so forth. You think that because you didn't have a product inside of Sephora that you weren't going to be subject to accountability? No, you absolutely have to understand it, especially in marketing. If you are doing, I don't care, network marketing, social media marketing, consumer, whatever that is, there is a responsibility to truly understanding what matters to the end user or the end buyer. And right now, there is a direct connection between core values and dollars spent. So I no longer support, right? I no longer support. So not only did I call out this company, every black woman I know, and I know a lot, I messaged and said, make sure you don't support from this one. And then what ends up happening? They end up sharing and they end up posting. This is not to be played around with, right? So if that were on the flip side and that was legit and I had a good experience, you have a customer. Right? Because you're saying to me that, hey, we recognize that in this industry that is over 100 years old, that is worth over $400 billion. Meanwhile, Rihanna was able to come in and carve out $3.5 billion in less than 3 years, which tells you black women were not being considered a real customer. But I digress. The fact that I now have done this homework and you have delivered, I'm going to be loyal. But you cannot assume that I am not doing my homework. And that is the mistake that I think most marketers are making, is that they think that simply by putting people of color, let me throw Ramona into this ad. Let me go get my girl Lucy Liu and throw her in this ad. Well, if you're not actually speaking to or providing services for Lucy Liu, but you're trying to target that customer, you are putting yourself at risk. And I don't care who you are. No company can afford cancel culture. That is real.
Yeah. So as we are thinking through this and we're thinking about this true, authentic marketing, how do we move beyond this surface level and give us a few, like maybe 3 characteristics of an inclusive networker? What are they doing every day? What are some things that we need to be putting in place? Because there's differences, right? There's the company level of network marketing, and then there's the individual team level, right? And so as we're thinking, we can talk about a lot about what companies do, but what do they do at the team level as an inclusive networker to really ensure that they're being authentic and that they're moving into this space of true authentic marketing?
Yeah, so for me, I think it starts with making sure that you have various perspectives. Right? So if everyone on your team looks like you, that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have various perspectives. You and I are both black women, but we grew up entirely different, right?
Yeah.
And so our perspectives, the way that we view the world, the way that we think that the world views us are entirely different. So simply by making sure that you have various perspectives in line, you're more likely to be more inclusive. You're also more likely to be more intentional and considerate about other people. Because again, back to that earlier statement of, if it doesn't affect me, it doesn't affect me, right? And so my lens, no matter how inclusive I intend to be or I try to be, I still have a certain lens. And so you do need to have that perspective. I also believe in challenging your existing perspectives or beliefs. I grew up a certain way. I grew up believing that everything needed to be like this. And if you didn't fit into this particular box, you meant me harm. Well, as I got older, I realized that that's not necessarily true. Like, those aren't even really my beliefs. That's what I was trained and conditioned and taught to believe. And so challenge what you believe, like what you really think you believe, challenge yourself on it. And then I'm just a huge proponent of reading, watching, and listening, right? I read as much as I possibly can. while I appreciate Netflix and chilling, I definitely prefer to read more and listen more and just feed, right? Feed my mind. And some things I read and I'm like, that's an interesting perspective. I don't agree with it, but at least I appreciate the perspective and where they're coming from. I believe in watching, right? I like to watch other people, how they interact, how they respond, how I think that person interpreted what she said versus what that person meant, right? And then just listening. I've always been a talker, like blah, 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 always been a talker. It's only been in the latter part of my life, and I do mean like the last couple of years, where I've gotten a lot better at listening, right? Just to people's experiences and their differences and our similarities and just paying attention, right? Like I feel like you can just learn so much simply by shutting up and listening. And if you're trying to be more inclusive, you don't want to listen to the same people from the same school, from the same church, from the same neighbor. No, it really is about including those various perspectives and just listening to their stories. One of the best experiences I ever had was I went to Dubai in 2017, and I grew up somewhat Christian, and I had very, very strong beliefs about Muslim culture, but particularly about women, how they were treated, how they felt, etc. And so I did this breakfast with the natives, which was so cool. I'm in Abu Dhabi, and I'm surrounded by these women that are head to toe. First of all, summer's hot as balls out there. And I was like, why aren't you guys like sad and like, don't you feel oppressed and don't you feel like all of these ridiculous assumptions that I had about them? And they listened. These are older women. No, we don't. This is our culture. This is what we believe, right? We support this. There's this, you assume that we feel this way because your culture is so different. But does it ever occur to you that we find your culture offensive? Right? And for me, it was one of the most powerful and impactful experiences I have ever had, because they very politely, but very seriously put me in my place. And I learned so much. And that was that. First of all, we had this amazing breakfast. You know, I'm a foodie, right? The food was amazing.
Absolutely.
Right? I'm crushing everything they put in front of me. It was so good. And I'm just like being TaChelle. Like, don't you guys feel so sad? Right? Like you have to pull this down to eat. And they're just like, no. Right? But it was so impactful. Like to this day, it gives me chills every time I think about it, because it was such a real experience. But had I not taken the time to listen after I just made all of these ridiculous statements, I don't think I would have had a moment as impactful as that one. Right? And from there, I have been really, really good about listening. And not assuming that I know more about you and your culture than you do. Right? Like now I think about it and I'm like, how arrogant.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? How arrogant and stupid and naive and foolish and juvenile, like how all of that. But more importantly, how curious that I was willing to say, isn't this how you guys really feel? And learn something. So listening, I actually love sharing that story, because for me it was impactful. And then all my friends are like, why the hell did you go to Dubai?
Well, I think that translates so well over into what we talk about when we're talking about teams in network marketing, because if we just sit with our team and say, hey, how does it feel for you to go through this system? What is it like doing this presentation? Are the incentives that we have for you good? What is it like for you to, have these meetings? And how do you feel the culture of our team works for you? A lot of times I tell people, you think you don't have diversity because everybody on your team looks the same. But as you said, the perspectives are so different. If you just talk to people, there's a lot of difference in thoughts and backgrounds and how people really interpret the things that you do, as far as your systems and the way that you do the work that you do. And so I love that, listening, getting those perspectives. And then I think one thing, and a lot of people question this idea of belonging. Like, do we really want to feel belonging? Like, what does that mean? But I do think, if I use the word belonging now, the way that we help people to feel like they belong is not only listening, but then translating that information back into change, into action. And that's one thing that has been an issue with diversity, equity, and inclusion, is that we do these one-off types of trainings. We do a lot of listening sometimes, and then there's nothing that happens beyond that. Yeah. And so I think that's an important point, is that yes, we want people to listen and to do those things, but how have you reflected and then changed based on what you heard? And that is what is really going to make the difference.
Listening without action is pointless, right? Like,
yeah,
you do need to be able to take action. It's also important to acknowledge that sometimes there's no action required, right? Like, sometimes the action is listening, because a lot of what we're talking about are people that feel unheard. They feel underrepresented. They feel not seen. And so me listening, me taking 5 minutes, 10 minutes to actually listen, my action may not be immediate. My action might be later on when someone else speaks up and I can say, oh, no. This is what that was. This is what that actually meant, etc. But you're spot on. Like, one of the, for me at least, and I'm sure this is similar for you when you're engaged to do a training, or I do a lot of speaking. And so what's my action after that? Right? You pay me for an hour. I'm showing up for an hour. I'm delivering. Action is 100% on you, right? So you can listen. You can take these. You can take every one of the takeaways. You can take these and actually implement them, or you can't. But my action was to make sure that I showed up and I delivered you tangible solutions to a problem. And for a lot of people, just having the option to listen, having the option to learn, may not result in immediate action. Right? Immediate. But you are right. I think the next step, at least where I am in my life, in my business, is more on the accountability side. So you listened. Okay? Right? So you may not have anything to do right now. But when you do, will you step up?
Yes, absolutely.
Right? When you do, will you claim that you didn't know anything about this, or you don't have any solutions? Or will you actually step the F up? And do your part? And that for me is by far the most important, Doc, right? It's like, when you do have the option, you and I are on stages, right? We're in rooms that other people aren't. So we have the ability to make more impact. We have the ability, you have this amazing podcast, you're launching multiple voices and platforms. But for those that aren't, when their time does come, are they going to take action?
That's good. That's good. So as we think about then some final thoughts on how to take that action. And so if we come to a person, they say, TaChelle, Ramona, my network is small. I really want to be, inclusive networker. I want to grow my network. I don't even know where to start. So what is it that people need to do to start to be that inclusive networker and grow their networks?
Well, I would say, like some of my earlier thoughts, challenge your beliefs, right? Get outside of your comfort zone. I think now there's literally no excuse, because there are multiple virtual worlds that we can join, right? And so being bound to a small town in Georgia is no longer an excuse. Right?
Yeah.
It's not. So I think it really is about challenging where you currently are and stepping outside of your comfort zone to start interacting with people that aren't necessarily like you. I also think it takes a lot of courage to ask someone within your circle to introduce you to someone outside of your circle, right? To just make a connection. I can't tell you how many times over the last year I've had someone reach out to me and say, hey, I have someone that's interested in learning more about DEI, or I have someone that's interested in entering into this space. Would you spend 15 or 20 minutes with them? If I can carve out the space, I carve it out, right? Because anyone who is committed to really understanding more, I'll share. I'm not going to share too much because I get paid to do this. Let's just be honest. Yeah. But I'll share enough, right? Like, come on, I'm not going to do too much, but I'll at least share enough about my experience, because I believe in the value of perspectives. I truly do. I think it's such a mistake to assume that because we are both Black women or because they're both Hispanic men, that their experiences are the same. It's right. Not true. I've been afforded privileges that a lot of Black women I know have not. Right? I move in circles where I know a lot of Black men have not been. I understand that. And so if whatever I can do to contribute to another person's experience and learning, I'm willing to do that. So I think in terms of tangible actions, it's putting yourself out there. And that can be scary. It can be very uncomfortable, especially if you're used to sticking within a certain network, right? Like I have friends that went to UNLV. They only talk to people that went to UNLV. I'm like, I've done an exec course at Cornell. I've done one at UCLA. I've done one at Dartmouth. I've done 2 at UNLV. I talk to everybody because I believe in the value of perspectives. So I hope that's good. I mean, I don't really know much else that is as effective as just learning more about people's experiences and having real conversations, because we agree that that's part of the problem, is that we're not having enough of these conversations. So you and I could talk all day about our childhood, right? And even though we both have moms, they're very different. Right?
Absolutely.
We both grew up with sisters. They're very different. And so just being able to have those conversations, I think, is such an impactful way of just kind of reshaping the way you think, not only being a more inclusive marketer, but being a more inclusive person, just being more open to different ideas. Again, I go back to my Dubai experience of like, now I shut up. I look at this woman and I'm humbled. I'm humbled by how strong she is in her belief, because I'm not. So how dare I say something?
Yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff. So tell us, this has been an absolutely wonderful conversation, TaChelle. So tell us, where can we find you? Where can the Inclusive Networker audience plug into more of TaChelle?
So you can find us. We are on probably the most engaged on LinkedIn, and that's at Fig Firm or at Fig Strategy and Consulting. The website. Let me rephrase. I didn't do any of that right. Cut, starting over. Okay, so you can find us. Our website is figfirm.com. The social handle on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter is at figfirm. And we have an active blog, or I think it's active newsletter on LinkedIn. You can go onto the website and subscribe to our newsletter. We do a lot of data-driven case studies and reviews on diversity, particularly on the business side. I am in the process of working on a really big hospitality study based on the workforce and labor challenges that we have in my hometown of Las Vegas. And I'm pretty engaged. Like, hit me up on LinkedIn. That's probably the best. TaChelle Lawson or at Fig Firm.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, TaChelle, and thank you all for listening to this episode of The Inclusive Networker. Thank you to my fabulous guest again, TaChelle Lawson. You will find her information in the show notes, and we will see you on the next episode of The Inclusive Networker. Bye.